During a BTS concert, Jungkook suddenly stops the music and walks to Jimin. What he whispers next breaks the entire stadium into tears. The music died in the middle of the chorus. 1 second, the stadium was shaking with bass. The next, it felt like the world had been unplugged. 80,000 lightsticks flickered in confusion as the final echo of the instrumental dissolved into the night air. The massive screens above the stage froze on a close-up of Jungkook standing completely still, microphone hanging loosely in his hand, chest rising and falling as if he had just run a mile. The rest of BTS turned toward him in confusion. Kim Namjoon lowered his mic slightly. Kim Taehyung glanced at the sound crew. Min Yoongi frowned, already sensing something wasn't part of the script. And at the far end of the stage stood Park Jimin, breathing hard from the choreography, sweat glistening under the white stadium lights. The crowd murmured. At first, they thought it was a technical problem. But Jungkook didn't look toward the control booths. He looked at Jimin. Only Jimin. The silence grew heavier with every second. The stage lights shifted into a dim blue glow, washing the massive arena in a strange calm. Somewhere in the distance, a fan screamed Jungkook's name, but even that sounded small against the weight hanging in the air. Jungkook swallowed. He hadn't planned this moment down to the second, but he had carried it in his chest for years like a secret burning hole through his ribs. And tonight, the music had suddenly felt wrong. Too loud. Too fake. Too far away from the truth he could no longer hold inside. He lifted the microphone slowly. But instead of speaking to the crowd, he turned his back to them and began walking. Every step echoed across the stage. The giant screens followed him automatically, showing the slow approach as if it were a scene from a movie no one had been warned about. The distance between him and Jimin wasn't far, but somehow it felt like walking across years. Jimin's eyebrows tightened slightly. He knew Jungkook too well. The smallest shift in Jungkook's breathing, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers curled slightly when he was nervous, Jimin could read all of it like sheet music. And right now, something was very wrong. Jungkook stopped just a few feet away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The stadium held its breath. Up close, Jimin could see that Jungkook's eyes were shining, not from sweat, but from something far more fragile. Memories flashed through Jungkook's mind in painful clarity. The tiny practice room from years ago. The smell of dust and energy drinks. Jimin laughing after missing a step. Late nights when they were the last two people awake in the dorm, talking about fears they would never admit in interviews. Jungkook had always been the strong one on stage. But off stage, there were nights when the silence between them said more than any words. Jimin tilted his head slightly. Jungkook, he murmured quietly, his mic lowered so the audience couldn't hear. But the stadium microphones were sensitive. 80,000 people heard the soft confusion in his voice. Jungkook inhaled deeply. His hands trembled. For years he had buried the truth beneath schedules, performances, smiles, interviews, jokes. Fame made everything bigger, but it also forced some things to stay hidden. Yet the moment he saw Jimin almost slip during the choreography tonight, just a small stumble that no one else noticed, something inside Jungkook cracked open. Because in that tiny second of panic, Jungkook realized something terrifying. The world could lose Jimin. And Jungkook had never once said the one thing that mattered most. He stepped closer. Now they were only inches apart. The crowd had stopped shouting. Thousands of phones were raised in silence, recording a moment no one understood. Namjoon watched carefully from the side of the stage. He had a feeling this wasn't about the show anymore. Jungkook lifted the microphone again. But when he spoke, his voice wasn't directed to the stadium. It was meant for only one person. Still, every speaker carried the words into the night. Jimin, he said softly. Jimin's eyes widened slightly. There was a rawness in Jungkook's voice he had never heard before, not in rehearsals, not in interviews, not even in their most exhausted late-night conversations. Jungkook's mind flashed back again. To the first time, Jimin cried during trainee days. To the way Jimin always pretended to be strong in front of everyone else. To the quiet habit Jimin had of humming when he thought no one was listening. And to the terrifying possibility that one day all those small things could disappear. Jungkook's throat tightened. He lowered the microphone slightly and leaned closer so that the distance between their foreheads was barely a breath. Then he said the sentence he had carried inside his chest for years. If the world ever forgets you, I will remember enough for both of us. The words weren't loud. They weren't dramatic. But something about them cracked open the entire stadium. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Jimin blinked. His lips parted as if he wanted to respond, but no sound came out. Emotion rushed across his face too quickly to hide. Shock, confusion, warmth, and something deeper that had lived quietly between them for a very long time. The big screens captured everything. Every flicker of feeling. Every fragile second. Somewhere in the crowd, a fan began to cry. Then another. Within moments, the sound spread like falling rain. Not screaming. Not cheering. Just thousands of people crying quietly. Namjoon rubbed the back of his neck and sighed softly, a faint smile touching his lips. Yoongi looked down at the stage floor, pretending not to notice the sting in his eyes. Taehyung covered his mouth. Because somehow everyone on that stage understood the same thing at the same time. Jungkook hadn't stopped the music for drama. He had stopped it because some words were too real to be buried beneath choreography and fireworks. Jimin finally spoke, his voice barely steady. You stopped the whole concert just to say that. Jungkook nodded once. The stadium lights shimmered across the ocean of purple lightsticks. For years, Jungkook said quietly, I thought there would always be another chance. Jimin stared at him. And for the first time that night, he smiled, softly, warmly, the kind of smile he used to give back in the tiny practice rooms when the future still felt uncertain. Well, Jimin replied, voice trembling slightly, good thing you said it now. For a long moment, the two of them simply stood there while the crowd cried around them, the stage lights glowing like distant stars. Then Jungkook finally turned back toward the audience. He lifted the microphone again, this time addressing the entire stadium. His voice was steadier now. Sometimes, he said, the most important things in life aren't in the songs. He looked briefly back at Jimin. They're in the people standing next to you when the music stops. And when the band slowly began playing again, softer this time, the entire stadium sang, not just with their voices, but with hearts that had just witnessed something painfully, beautifully human. The first note of the restarted music trembled through the speakers like a fragile heartbeat, but the stadium was no longer the same place it had been minutes earlier. People were still crying. The sea of purple lightsticks shook as thousands of hands wiped tears, yet nobody looked away from the stage. Something raw had just been exposed, something real enough to slice through the polished perfection everyone expected from a BTS concert. And the members felt it too. Jungkook tried to continue the performance, but his voice carried a tremor that wasn't part of the choreography. His gaze kept drifting back to Park Jimin as if he needed to confirm that moment had actually happened. Jimin sang his lines perfectly, but the softness in his expression had changed. Something deeper now lived behind his eyes. When the song ended, the crowd exploded into thunderous applause that rolled through the arena like a storm. Yet the members didn't jump immediately into the next track. Instead, the stage lights softened. Namjoon stepped forward slowly. Kim Namjoon had handled many unexpected moments during concerts, but even he looked like he was choosing his words carefully. Well, he said into the microphone, a half-laugh escaping him, that was not in the rehearsal. The audience laughed through their tears. Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Jimin looked down at the stage floor, smiling shyly. Namjoon turned toward Jungkook with a raised eyebrow. You stopped the entire show. Jungkook nodded. Yes. Namjoon waited. The silence stretched long enough to make the crowd lean forward. That's it, Namjoon asked. The audience laughed again, tension breaking for a moment. But before Jungkook could respond, another voice cut in. So that's what this was about. The voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge in it. Min Yoongi stepped forward from the side of the stage, holding his mic loosely. His eyes moved between Jungkook and Jimin with quiet curiosity. You shut down 80,000 people just to say one sentence. Jungkook shrugged slightly. Yes. Yoongi stared at him for a long moment. Then he smirked. Dramatic. The crowd roared. Taehyung suddenly jumped in, unable to contain himself anymore. Kim Taehyung pointed dramatically between Jungkook and Jimin. Wait, he said loudly. Are we just going to ignore what he said? Jimin groaned softly. Taehyung. No, Taehyung continued, spinning toward the audience. Did everyone hear that? That was like the most emotional confession in concert history. The stadium erupted again. Jungkook covered his face with his hand. It wasn't a confession. Oh really? Taehyung shot back immediately, because it sounded like one. Jimin's ears turned red. Namjoon chuckled quietly. You're not helping. But the moment had already taken on a life of its own. Fans were shouting. Some chanting Jungkook's name. Others screaming Jimin's. Jimin finally lifted his microphone again. You're all overreacting, he said, trying to sound calm. But his voice betrayed him slightly. Jungkook looked at him. Am I? Jimin froze. There it was again, that raw honesty in Jungkook's tone. No performance. No playful teasing. Just truth. The stadium quieted again, as if sensing the shift. Jimin sighed. You couldn't have said that backstage. Jungkook shook his head. No. Why not? Jungkook hesitated. For the first time since stopping the music, uncertainty crept into his expression. Because backstage, he said slowly, I might have lost the courage. The crowd gasped softly. Yoongi muttered under his breath, unbelievable. Namjoon looked between them again, clearly realizing this conversation was drifting far outside normal concert territory. But he didn't stop it. Something important was unfolding. Jimin folded his arms. So you chose the middle of a concert instead. Yes. That's insane. I know. The blunt honesty made several members laugh. But Jimin wasn't laughing. He stepped closer to Jungkook now, lowering his voice slightly, even though the microphones still carried every word. You scared me. Jungkook blinked. Why? Because when the music stopped, Jimin said, I thought something terrible had happened. Jungkook's expression softened. Something terrible almost did. The words hung in the air. Jimin frowned slightly. What do you mean? Jungkook looked at him carefully. You stumbled during the choreography. Jimin blinked. That? Yes. Jimin stared at him as if processing something unbelievable. You stopped a concert because I almost slipped. It wasn't just that. Then what? Jungkook hesitated again. The stadium waited. His voice came out quieter this time. For a second, I imagined the stage without you. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Even the members fell silent. Jimin's confident stage persona cracked for just a moment. You're being ridiculous. Maybe. But you scared 80,000 people. I scared myself too. Jimin searched Jungkook's face. And suddenly, he understood. Jungkook had never been good at hiding emotions when they reached a certain point. When something mattered enough, he simply acted. No filters. No calculation. Just instinct. Jimin let out a quiet laugh. You're unbelievable. Jungkook smiled slightly. But you're still here. Yes, Jimin replied, I'm still here. The tension slowly melted into warmth again. Taehyung clapped loudly. Okay, but seriously, he said, grinning mischievously, the internet is going to explode after this. Yoongi nodded. It already has. Namjoon finally stepped forward again, raising his microphone. Well, he said with a grin, since Jungkook has decided to turn tonight into the most emotional concert in history. The crowd cheered. We should probably continue the show before the staff completely panics. Behind them, several stage managers were indeed staring with wide eyes. Jungkook laughed softly. Sorry. Namjoon patted his shoulder. Next time, he said, warn us before stopping the music in front of 80,000 people. No promises. The audience roared with laughter again. But as the band prepared for the next song, Jimin leaned slightly closer to Jungkook. His voice dropped to a quiet murmur. You know something. What? Jimin's smile returned, gentle but meaningful. That sentence you said. Jungkook waited. I'm going to remember it longer than any song we perform tonight. For the first time since the music had stopped earlier, Jungkook felt his chest finally loosen. The lights brightened. The beat of the next track started. And as the stadium erupted back into music, something between them had shifted permanently, not louder than the concert, but far more powerful than anything written into the setlist. The concert should have returned to normal after that moment, but nothing about the night felt normal anymore. The next song exploded through the stadium with pounding drums and flashing lights, yet something electric lingered in the air, something heavier than music. 80,000 fans were screaming the lyrics, but many of them were watching only two people on stage. Jun Jungkook and Park Jimin. They moved through the choreography with flawless precision, years of muscle memory guiding every step. But every time their paths crossed, their eyes met for half a second longer than usual. The cameras noticed. The giant screens noticed. The fans definitely noticed. During the bridge of the song, Jungkook spun across the stage and stopped beside Jimin as the choreography required. Normally, they would turn away from each other immediately after the move. Tonight, they didn't. For one strange second, they simply stood there, breathing hard under the burning white lights. Jimin leaned closer while still smiling for the audience. You've officially caused chaos, he murmured through clenched teeth. Jungkook smirked slightly. Worth it. You don't even know what you've started. I know exactly what I started. Jimin gave him a sharp look. Before he could respond, the choreography pulled them apart again. The song ended in a thunderous roar of cheers. Fireworks burst above the stage while the members bowed together, but the energy between them was different now, charged, unpredictable. Backstage cameras were already broadcasting live to the stadium screens, showing the members grabbing water during the short transition break. Kim Namjoon wiped sweat from his forehead and turned toward Jungkook with a look that was half amused and half concerned. You realize he said calmly, that every headline tomorrow will be about that sentence. Jungkook took a sip of water. Let them write. Min Yoongi leaned against a speaker, arms folded. You didn't even hesitate. No. Yoongi studied him carefully. You've been thinking about that for a long time, haven't you? Jungkook didn't answer immediately. The silence was answer enough. Jimin sat on a stage step, towel around his neck, pretending to focus on catching his breath. But he was listening. Taehyung suddenly burst out laughing. Kim Taehyung shook his head in disbelief. I still can't believe you stopped the music like that, he said. The staff backstage almost fainted. Namjoon nodded toward the stage entrance. They're still panicking. The group laughed lightly, but the tension hadn't disappeared. Jimin finally stood up. His expression had changed. The playful embarrassment from earlier was gone. Now there was something more serious in his eyes. He walked toward Jungkook. Can we talk? The other members exchanged subtle glances. Yoongi pushed himself off the speaker. Yeah, he muttered quietly, we're suddenly very thirsty somewhere else. Taehyung nodded dramatically. Extremely thirsty. Namjoon chuckled and guided the others toward the opposite side of the stage. Within seconds, Jungkook and Jimin were standing alone near the curtain separating the stage from the backstage area. The muffled roar of the audience hummed through the walls like distant thunder. Jimin crossed his arms. You embarrassed me. Jungkook blinked. That wasn't the plan. Then what was the plan? Jungkook shrugged slightly. I didn't really have one. That's obvious. Jimin ran a hand through his damp hair. Do you understand how big that moment was? Yes. And you still did it. Yes. Jimin stared at him, searching his face. You don't regret it. Not even a little. Jimin let out a slow breath. The silence stretched. Finally he spoke again, his voice lower now. You've been acting strange lately. Jungkook tilted his head. How? You keep watching me like you're trying to memorize something. Jungkook didn't deny it. Jimin's eyes narrowed slightly. That scares me. Why? Because people memorize things when they think they might lose them. Jungkook looked down briefly. That's not entirely wrong. Jimin felt a small chill run through his chest. Jungkook. But before he could finish, a staff member rushed past the curtain. 2 minutes until the next set. The announcement snapped them back into reality. Jimin rubbed his temples. We're not finished talking. Jungkook nodded. I know. The staff member peeked around the corner again nervously. 30 seconds. The two idols stood there for a moment longer, the tension between them now thicker than before. Jimin stepped closer. You can't just drop emotional bombs in the middle of concerts, he whispered. Jungkook smiled faintly. You survived. That's not the point. What is the point? Jimin hesitated. Then he said quietly, the point is that what you said meant something. Jungkook's expression softened. It was supposed to. Jimin shook his head slowly. You're dangerous when you're honest. Good. Jimin blinked. That wasn't a compliment. It sounded like one. From the stage, the opening beat of the next song began. The crowd roared again. Jimin sighed. We have to go. They stepped back toward the stage entrance together. But right before the curtain lifted, Jimin grabbed Jungkook's wrist. Jungkook turned. Jimin looked directly into his eyes. If you ever stop the music like that again, he said quietly, you better have something even more shocking to say. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. Vote. Jimin's voice dropped almost to a whisper. Because now everyone is watching us. The curtain lifted. The blinding stadium lights flooded over them again. The next performance began, louder and more explosive than the last. The choreography was faster, the energy more aggressive, the crowd screaming like a tidal wave. Yet beneath the spectacle, something fragile and volatile was unfolding between them, something the audience could feel even if they didn't fully understand it. Halfway through the set, Jungkook caught a glimpse of the giant screens during a dance break. They weren't showing the choreography. They were showing fan reactions. People crying. People hugging each other. People holding signs that read things like, "We heard you," and "Say it again." Jungkook laughed breathlessly. The moment had already become something bigger than he expected. When the song ended, the members gathered together again for another talking segment. Namjoon looked out at the ocean of fans, clearly trying to maintain some structure in the show. "So," he said carefully, "tonight has been memorable." The crowd cheered wildly. Yoongi leaned into his microphone. "That's one way to describe it." Taehyung grinned mischievously. "I vote we let Jungkook speak again." The audience erupted instantly. Jimin groaned loudly. "No." Namjoon laughed. "Actually, I'm curious too." Jungkook raised his hands defensively. "I already said my piece." Taehyung shook his head. "Oh no, you opened the door." Yoongi added calmly, "You don't get to close it now." Jimin glared at them. "You're all enjoying this way too much." Namjoon turned back toward Jungkook. "Just one question." Jungkook sighed. "Fine." Namjoon's voice softened slightly. "When you walked across the stage earlier, did you know what you were about to say?" The stadium went silent again. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Then back at Namjoon. "Yes." "And you meant it?" Jungkook nodded. "Every word." The crowd erupted into emotional cheers again. Jimin rubbed his face with both hands. "This is a disaster." But despite the chaos, a small smile escaped him. Because deep down, he knew something the audience didn't. That single sentence Jungkook spoke earlier had shaken the entire stadium. But the truth behind it was even deeper than anyone realized. And the night was far from over. The roar of the crowd refused to fade. Even after the next performance ended and the members stood in a line beneath the blinding stadium lights, the energy in the air had turned volatile, like a storm circling above 80,000 hearts. The giant screens flashed between close-ups of the members and the ocean of fans waving purple light sticks. Yet every time the camera passed across the stage, it lingered just a second longer on Jungkook and Park Jimin. People could feel it. Something between them had cracked open. And once something real shows itself in front of that many people, it cannot easily be hidden again. Kim Namjoon stepped forward again with the calm authority that had carried the group through years of unpredictable moments. "All right," he said into the microphone, trying to bring the atmosphere back under control. "Before the internet explodes completely, maybe we should talk about what just happened." The stadium erupted into laughter and cheers. Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck. Jimin stared straight ahead, like someone waiting for an incoming storm. Namjoon turned toward Jungkook. "You stopped the concert," he said slowly, "confessed something emotional, and now half the audience is crying." "That wasn't a confession," Jungkook said. From beside him, Min Yoongi snorted quietly. "That's exactly what someone who made a confession would say." The crowd screamed with delight. Jimin muttered under his breath, "Please stop encouraging him." Kim Taehyung leaned forward dramatically, pointing his mic between them. No, no, we need clarification. Jimin glared at him. Taehyung. Yes. Don't. Too late. Taehyung turned toward Jungkook with a grin that was half mischievous and half genuinely curious. When you said that sentence, were you talking as a friend or something else? The stadium exploded. People screamed so loudly, the sound vibrated through the stage floor. Jimin closed his eyes for a second like someone experiencing physical pain. Namjoon rubbed his temple. Yoongi watched Jungkook carefully. The question hung in the air like a live wire. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward Jimin. Jimin's eyes opened again slowly. There was warning in them, but also something else. Fear. Not fear of Jungkook. Fear of the moment. You don't have to answer that, Jimin said quickly. Taehyung tilted his head. Vote. Jimin forced a smile toward the audience. It's just a dramatic moment between friends. The crowd made a playful sound of disbelief. Jungkook was still watching him. Just friends, Jungkook repeated quietly. Jimin turned his head slightly. Yes. The single word landed harder than expected. Something flickered across Jungkook's expression, something quick and painful. Yoongi noticed immediately. Namjoon noticed too. Taehyung's grin faded slightly. Jungkook lifted his microphone again. His voice was calm. Too calm, if that's what you want to call it. The tension snapped tight. Jimin stared at him. What does that mean? Jungkook shrugged. Nothing. That didn't sound like nothing. Maybe you're overthinking. Jimin stepped closer. Jungkook. The tone in his voice carried a quiet warning. The audience felt the shift instantly. This was no longer playful teasing. Namjoon stepped slightly forward, as if preparing to intervene if necessary. But Jungkook spoke first. You asked earlier why I said that sentence in front of everyone, he said. Yes. Do you really want the answer? Jimin hesitated. The crowd fell silent again. Every person in the stadium could sense that whatever came next would change something. Jimin crossed his arms, defensive. Go ahead. Jungkook inhaled slowly. Because sometimes, he said, when you wait too long to say something, the truth becomes heavier than the consequences. Jimin frowned. That's vague. Jungkook laughed softly. Then let me be clear. The silence deepened. I meant it, Jungkook said, not just as a friend. The stadium erupted into a shocked roar, so loud the sound system almost distorted. Jimin's eyes widened. Jungkook. But Jungkook kept speaking. For years I told myself it didn't matter, that the music mattered more, that the fans mattered more, that everything else came first. His voice was steady, but the emotion underneath it was unmistakable. But tonight, he continued, when I saw you almost fall, I realized something. Jimin's breathing slowed. What? That I was more afraid of losing you than losing anything else. The stadium exploded again. Some fans screamed. Others cried harder. The members stood frozen, caught between shock and understanding. Jimin ran a hand through his hair, clearly overwhelmed. You're unbelievable. Probably. You're saying this in front of 80,000 people. I know. And millions watching online. I know that too. Jimin laughed suddenly, but it wasn't entirely a happy sound. You've lost your mind. Jungkook smiled faintly. Maybe I finally found it. Jimin paced a few steps across the stage, trying to gather his thoughts. The cameras followed every movement. He turned back sharply. You think this is simple. I didn't say that. You think feelings like that don't complicate everything. They already complicate everything. Jimin's voice sharpened. We are not just two people. I know. We are part of something bigger than ourselves. I know that too. Then why would you say it here? Jungkook's eyes softened. Because here, you couldn't run away from it. The words hit like thunder. Jimin stopped moving. The crowd gasped. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Jimin whispered, You think I've been running away? Jungkook didn't answer. That silence was answer enough. Jimin stared at him, something conflicted swirling in his eyes. You really are cruel sometimes, he said quietly. Jungkook blinked. I'm honest. That's worse. The tension was so thick, the rest of the members barely breathed. Namjoon finally spoke gently. Maybe we should take a break. No, Jimin interrupted softly. His gaze was still locked on Jungkook. You started this, Jimin said. Yes. So finish it. Jungkook hesitated for the first time. Finish what? The truth. The stadium waited. Jungkook's voice lowered. The truth is, I've been pretending not to feel something for years. Jimin's expression flickered. And tonight you just decided to stop pretending. Yes. Jimin exhaled slowly. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not the playful stage smile. Something quieter. More complicated. You're an idiot. The audience laughed nervously. Jungkook shrugged. I've been called worse. Jimin stepped closer again. So what now? He asked softly. Jungkook looked out at the endless crowd, the glowing lights, the cameras capturing every second. Then he looked back at Jimin. Now, he said, we finish the concert. Jimin blinked. That's your answer? Yes. You confess something insane in front of the world, and then we just continue performing. Jungkook nodded. That's our job. Jimin stared at him. Then suddenly, he burst out laughing. The sound echoed across the stadium. You're impossible. Probably. Jimin shook his head, still laughing softly. But when he looked at Jungkook again, there was no anger in his eyes. Only emotion, confusion, and something dangerously close to understanding. Namjoon finally clapped his hands once, relieved the tension hadn't exploded completely. Well, he said with a grin, this is officially the most chaotic concert we've ever done. Yoongi nodded. And the most honest. Taehyung looked out at the crying audience. I think they love it. The crowd screamed louder in agreement. Jimin sighed and lifted his microphone again. All right, he said, voice steady but eyes still shining. Let's finish the show. Music thundered back through the stadium. Fireworks burst into the night sky. And as the members moved into the next choreography, the entire arena understood one thing clearly. Tonight had stopped being just a concert. It had become something far more dangerous. The moment when truth finally stepped onto the stage and refused to hide again. The music returned like thunder crashing through a fragile silence, but the stadium no longer felt like a concert venue. It felt like a place where something irreversible had just begun. The opening beats of the next song pulsed through the speakers, bass vibrating beneath the stage as the members of BTS moved into formation again. Fire cannons erupted along the stage edges, sending waves of heat across the front rows. Yet the performance had changed. The choreography was perfect, the vocals powerful, but beneath the spectacle, the tension between Jungkook and Park Jimin was now impossible to ignore. Every movement between them carried weight. When they passed each other during the dance break, their shoulders almost brushed. Neither looked away. The crowd screamed louder than ever. They had come for music. Instead, they were witnessing something far more dangerous. Two people standing on a stage who had just exposed something real in front of the world. The song ended in a burst of fireworks that painted the sky in violent colors. The members regrouped near the center stage platform, breathing heavily. Sweat glistened under the white lights, their chests rising with exhaustion. Kim Namjoon glanced toward the backstage area, where managers were clearly whispering anxiously into headsets. Then he turned back to the crowd with a calm smile. "Well," he said slowly, "this concert is definitely going down in history." The audience roared. Namjoon laughed quietly. "I can already imagine the meetings tomorrow." Min Yoongi leaned toward his microphone. "Tomorrow," he said dryly, "they're probably panicking right now." The stadium erupted with laughter. Kim Taehyung glanced at Jungkook with a mischievous grin. "You know," he said, "I thought tonight would be dramatic." Jimin groaned quietly. "Please stop talking." Taehyung ignored him. "But I didn't expect a live confession during the setlist." Jimin turned toward him sharply. "It wasn't a confession." Taehyung raised his eyebrows. "Then what do you call it?" Jimin opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Yoongi chuckled under his breath. "Exactly." Jimin ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "You're all enjoying this too much." Jungkook stood slightly behind them, silent. But he wasn't calm. Inside his chest, adrenaline was still crashing through him like a storm. Saying the truth out loud had felt like jumping off a cliff, and now he was still falling. Jimin suddenly turned toward him again. "Are you going to keep doing that?" Jungkook blinked. "Doing what?" "Standing there quietly like you didn't just start a global scandal." The crowd laughed nervously. Jungkook shrugged. "I told the truth." Jimin stepped closer. "You told the truth in the worst possible way. Is there a better way?" "Yes." "How?" "Privately." Jungkook's eyes softened slightly. "I tried that before." Jimin froze. "What?" Jungkook looked away toward the audience. "You didn't notice." A strange silence fell between them. The stadium noise seemed distant for a moment. Jimin frowned. "When?" Jungkook hesitated. "Years ago." Jimin searched his face. "You're joking." "I'm not." "You never said anything." "I tried." "How?" Jungkook exhaled slowly. "There were moments." "What moments?" "You just never looked at them the way I did." The words landed quietly but deeply. Jimin felt something twist in his chest. "You're rewriting history." Jungkook shook his head. "No." Jimin's voice lowered. "Then explain it." Jungkook met his eyes again. "Remember the night before our first stadium concert?" Jimin blinked. The memory surfaced instantly. The dorm balcony. Rain tapping against the railing. Both of them unable to sleep because of nerves. "You said you were scared," Jungkook continued softly. "You thought the pressure would break you." Jimin swallowed. "And I told you I'd always stand next to you." Jimin scoffed lightly. "That's normal." Jungkook nodded slowly. "But that wasn't the sentence I meant to say." Jimin stared at him. The realization slowly crept across his face. "You're serious." Jungkook didn't look away. "For years." Jimin looked suddenly overwhelmed. "Why didn't you say it then?" Jungkook laughed quietly. Because you were already carrying too much. And now you think I'm not. Now I think I'm tired of pretending. The honesty in his voice cut deeper than any dramatic declaration. Jimin paced a few steps away, trying to process the storm inside his mind. The cameras followed him again. Fans were whispering, crying, holding their lightsticks tighter. This wasn't just emotional anymore. It was dangerously real. Namjoon watched carefully, sensing the tension rising again. Maybe we should move to the next song, he suggested gently. But Jimin turned back suddenly. No. The word echoed through the stadium. Everyone froze. Jimin looked straight at Jungkook. You want honesty? Jungkook nodded. Yes. Jimin's voice trembled slightly. Then answer me one thing. Okay. Why tonight? Jungkook hesitated. Because I thought I almost lost you. Jimin shook his head. That's not the whole reason. Jungkook stayed silent. Jimin stepped closer. You're leaving something out. The tension became suffocating. Finally, Jungkook spoke again. Fine. His voice dropped. Because I heard something this afternoon. Jimin frowned. What? Jungkook's eyes darkened slightly. I heard rumors you might take a long break after this tour. The words hit like lightning. The other members turned sharply. Namjoon blinked. Yoongi straightened. Taehyung looked confused. Jimin's expression hardened. Who told you that? Jungkook ignored the question. You weren't going to tell me. That's not. You were going to disappear for months. Jimin's voice sharpened. It's not disappearing, it's rest. Without telling me. You're not the center of my decisions. The sentence cut deeper than Jimin expected. Jungkook looked genuinely hurt for the first time that night. I know that. Then stop acting like I owe you explanations. I don't think you owe me anything. Then why are we having this conversation in front of 80,000 people? Jungkook laughed softly. Because now you can't avoid it. Jimin stared at him. You really are cruel. Maybe. But you're also honest. The two words hung in the air. Jimin exhaled slowly. For the first time since the chaos began, his anger softened. You idiot, he murmured. Jungkook smiled faintly. Probably. Jimin shook his head. Then he looked out at the massive stadium, the crying fans, the flashing cameras. The entire world watching. This is insane, he said quietly. Yeah. You've basically thrown a match into a forest fire. Jungkook shrugged. Sometimes fires show what's real. Jimin stared at him for a long moment. Then something unexpected happened. He laughed. Not awkwardly. Not nervously. A real laugh. You know what? Jimin said. What? You're not the only one who's been pretending. The crowd gasped. Jungkook's expression froze. What do you mean? Jimin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, so close their shoulders almost touched beneath the stage lights. His voice dropped to a quiet tone, only slightly amplified by the microphone. You think you're the only one who noticed those moments. Jungkook blinked. Jimin smiled faintly. Sometimes, he said softly, I looked away on purpose. The stadium erupted again, louder than anything that had happened all night. And for the first time since the music stopped earlier, Jungkook looked completely stunned. Because the truth he had just thrown into the world was suddenly no longer his alone. The stadium did not explode into noise immediately. For one strange moment, 80,000 people simply inhaled at the same time. Then the screaming started. It rolled across the arena like a shockwave. Fans jumped, cried, grabbed each other, some covering their mouths in disbelief as the giant screens zoomed in on the stunned expression of Jungkook. He didn't move. He didn't blink. The words from Park Jimin echoed in his head louder than the crowd. Sometimes I looked away on purpose. Jungkook stared at him like someone trying to determine if reality had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. "You're joking," Jungkook said quietly. Jimin tilted his head. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Jungkook opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The members behind them looked just as shocked. Kim Taehyung was literally frozen, with his microphone halfway to his mouth. Min Yoongi muttered under his breath, "Well, that escalated." Kim Namjoon ran a hand down his face slowly. "This concert is going to destroy the internet." But neither Jungkook nor Jimin heard them. They were too focused on each other. Jungkook finally stepped closer. "What does that mean?" Jimin shrugged slightly. "It means what it sounds like." "No," Jungkook said, "explain it." Jimin crossed his arms. "You're suddenly very curious. You just dropped a sentence that changes everything." Jimin raised an eyebrow. "Oh, now you understand what that feels like." The audience reacted with another wave of screams. Jungkook laughed softly in disbelief. "You're unbelievable." Jimin smirked faintly. "You started it." "That's not the same thing." "No, you confessed feelings in front of the world." "I told the truth. And now I am too." Jungkook studied him carefully. For years he had memorized Jimin's expressions, the subtle ones most people missed. Right now Jimin looked calm. Too calm. But there was tension in the way his fingers gripped the microphone. "You're serious," Jungkook said slowly. "Yes." "You noticed." "Yes." "For how long?" Jimin hesitated. The crowd leaned forward collectively. Finally he sighed. "Longer than you probably think." Jungkook shook his head in disbelief. "And you said nothing." Jimin's voice sharpened. "You said nothing either." "That's different." "How?" "Because I thought you didn't feel it." Jimin laughed suddenly. "And I thought you didn't want me to." The words hit like a thunderclap. Jungkook blinked. "That makes no sense." "It makes perfect sense." Jimin stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly even though the microphones carried everything. "You were always careful," he said, "always supportive, always close, but never crossing the line." Jungkook frowned. "I was trying to respect you. And I thought you were drawing a boundary." The realization hit them both at the same time. Years of misread signals. Years of silence built on the exact same fear. Yoongi let out a low whistle. "That's tragic." Taehyung nodded. "Like a drama." Namjoon looked toward the backstage area where several managers were now visibly panicking. "We are absolutely getting yelled at after this." Jimin ignored them. His eyes stayed on Jungkook. "So now what?" Jimin asked quietly. Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck. "I have no idea." "That's comforting." "You're the one who said you looked away on purpose." "Yes." "Why?" Jimin's answer came quickly. "Because we had everything to lose." The stadium quieted again. "You think we still do?" Jungkook asked. Jimin looked around the massive arena. Flashing lights. Cameras everywhere. Millions watching online. "Look around," Jimin said softly. "We are standing in the middle of it." Jungkook followed his gaze. Then he smiled slightly. Still worth it. Jimin stared at him. You're insane. Maybe. Do you even realize what headlines will say tomorrow? Yes. And you're not worried. Jungkook shrugged. I'm more worried about what happens if we keep pretending. Jimin didn't answer immediately. The truth in that sentence cut too deep. Namjoon stepped forward again, voice careful. Guys, he said quietly, we still have half a concert left. The audience laughed nervously. Yoongi added, and about 100 managers having heart attacks backstage. Taehyung leaned toward Jungkook. I'm just saying, if you two start arguing again, we might break the internet permanently. Jimin sighed. We are not arguing. Jungkook nodded. We are clarifying. That's even worse, Yoongi muttered. Jimin suddenly looked at Jungkook again, more serious now. Tell me something honestly. Okay. Did you really think I would disappear after this tour? Jungkook hesitated. Yes. Jimin frowned. You should know me better than that. I know you well enough to know when you're exhausted. Jimin looked away briefly. The truth of that sentence hit closer than he expected. For months, he had been pushing himself beyond the limit. Smiling through pain. Dancing through injuries. Pretending he wasn't slowly burning out. Jungkook noticed. Of course he did. You worry too much, Jimin said quietly. You hide too much. They stood there again, caught in another fragile silence. Finally, Jimin spoke. You know what the worst part is? What? Jimin smiled faintly. Part of me is glad you said it tonight. Jungkook blinked. Really? Yes. Why? Jimin glanced at the audience again. Because suddenly, all those years of pretending felt impossible now. Because if you didn't say it, Jimin admitted softly, I might have kept pretending forever. The crowd reacted with another emotional wave of cheers. Jungkook looked almost relieved. So you're not angry? Oh, I'm furious. That sounds about right. Jimin laughed. But not because you said it. Then why? Jimin stepped closer again, their voices quieter now despite the massive audience. Because you made me realize something. What? Jimin's eyes softened. That I've been lying to myself just as much as you have. Jungkook's heart skipped. The moment stretched. The stage lights shimmered across the ocean of fans. Namjoon cleared his throat loudly. All right, he said with a nervous laugh, before this turns into a full relationship discussion. The crowd roared with laughter. Maybe we should play another song. Yoongi nodded. Good idea. Taehyung grinned. Unless Jungkook wants to stop the music again. Jimin shot him a warning look. Don't give him ideas. Jungkook laughed quietly. But before the next song began, Jimin leaned closer one more time. His voice was barely above a whisper. You know something. What? You just changed our lives tonight. Jungkook met his gaze. Together. Jimin looked at him for a long second. Then he nodded slowly. And when the music exploded back into the stadium once again, everyone understood something undeniable. The truth had stepped onto the stage, and there was no way to push it back into the shadows. The next song began with an explosion of drums and flashing lights, but the performance no longer felt like just another part of the show. Something had shifted permanently on that stage, and everyone could feel it. The fans, the staff backstage, and especially the 7 members standing under the blinding stadium lights. Jungkook tried to focus on the choreography as the bass thundered through the speakers. His body moved with the precision built from years of training, yet his mind was still caught in the moment that had just unfolded. Across the stage, Park Jimin spun into position for the next dance break, his movements sharp and controlled. To anyone watching casually, he looked flawless as always. But Jungkook could see it. A tiny tension in Jimin's shoulders. The way his breathing was slightly uneven. The way his eyes occasionally drifted toward Jungkook between steps. They were both pretending the music had restored normality. It hadn't. The crowd was louder than ever, screaming lyrics, crying, waving their lightsticks like glowing stars in a restless galaxy. But beneath the spectacle, a different kind of tension simmered. The world had just watched something deeply personal unfold in real time. And nobody knew what would happen next. When the song ended, fireworks burst high above the stage. The members regrouped again near the center platform, breathing heavily as the roar of the audience rolled across the stadium. Kim Namjoon stepped forward first, trying to regain some sense of order. "All right," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead with a small laugh. "I think tonight officially wins the award for most unpredictable concert we've ever had." The crowd cheered wildly. Min Yoongi leaned toward his mic with his usual calm expression. "I'd like to thank Jungkook for creating emotional chaos." The audience laughed. Jungkook raised both hands defensively. "I didn't plan it like that." Kim Taehyung grinned. "That's the scary part." Jimin stood quietly beside them, drinking from a water bottle, avoiding Jungkook's eyes for the moment. Namjoon glanced toward him. "Jimin," he said carefully, "how are you feeling right now?" The crowd immediately screamed louder. Jimin lowered the bottle slowly. "I feel," he said thoughtfully, "like someone dropped a bomb in the middle of my evening." The stadium erupted in laughter. Jungkook winced. "That wasn't my intention." Jimin shot him a sideways look. "You stopped the entire concert and confessed feelings in front of the world." "I told the truth." "That's not always the same thing." Jungkook frowned. "Yes, it is." "No, it is." The tension flickered again between them, quick and sharp. Yoongi leaned back slightly, whispering toward Namjoon. "This is getting good." Namjoon elbowed him. "Stop enjoying it." But Jimin was still looking at Jungkook. "You realize you didn't give me any time to process this," Jimin said. Jungkook nodded slowly. "That's fair. You basically forced me into a response." "I didn't force you. You forced the situation." Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck. "Maybe." Jimin sighed. "You're impossible." Taehyung suddenly leaned into the conversation again, clearly unable to resist. "Just asking," he said with a mischievous grin, "but are we witnessing a love confession or a public argument?" The crowd exploded with laughter and screams. Jimin pointed at him. "You're making this worse." "I'm making it entertaining." Yoongi nodded. "True." Namjoon looked toward the backstage entrance again, where several managers were visibly signaling for the show to continue. "We are definitely getting lectures later," he murmured. Jungkook ignored them all. His attention was fixed entirely on Jimin. "You said something earlier," Jungkook said quietly. Jimin frowned slightly. "What?" "You said you sometimes looked away on purpose." Jimin exhaled slowly. "Yes." "Why?" The question carried more weight now. Jimin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced out at the massive audience, the lights stretching endlessly into the dark sky. Then he looked back at Jungkook. "Because feelings like that are dangerous," Jimin said softly. Jungkook tilted his head. "Dangerous for who?" "For everything." For us. For the group. The words landed heavily. The other members fell quiet. Jimin continued. We built something incredible together, he said, gesturing toward the stadium. Something bigger than ourselves. Jungkook nodded. I know. So what happens if something complicated breaks that balance? Jungkook's voice was calm. You think honesty would break us? Jimin hesitated. No. Then what? Jimin looked away briefly. Fear. Jungkook studied him. Fear of what? Jimin finally met his eyes again. Fear that if something goes wrong, we lose more than just feelings. The stadium had gone strangely quiet again. Even the fans sensed the gravity in Jimin's words. Jungkook stepped closer. You really think we're that fragile? No, Jimin said softly. I think we're human. Jungkook laughed quietly. That's true. The tension eased slightly. Taehyung clapped his hands dramatically. Well, he said, this has definitely become the most honest concert ever. Yoongi nodded. I feel like we should charge extra for therapy. The crowd laughed again. Namjoon raised his microphone. Okay, he said, smiling warmly, before this turns into a full emotional counseling session. The fans cheered. Let's play another song. But before the band could begin, Jimin suddenly reached out and grabbed Jungkook's wrist. The movement was small, but the cameras caught it instantly. The giant screens showed their hands clearly. The stadium gasped. Jimin looked directly at Jungkook. His voice dropped low, but the microphone still carried every word. You're not getting away with this that easily. Jungkook blinked. I wasn't trying to. You started something tonight. Yes, and I'm not sure I'm ready for what comes next. Jungkook's expression softened. That makes two of us. Jimin's grip tightened slightly for a second before he finally let go. But I meant what I said earlier, Jimin added quietly. Jungkook tilted his head. Which part? Jimin gave a small, complicated smile. That sometimes I looked away on purpose. Jungkook felt his heartbeat stumble. Why? Jimin's eyes flickered with emotion. Because if I didn't, he said softly, I might have looked too long. The stadium erupted again in stunned cheers and tears. Jungkook stood there speechless for a moment. Then slowly, despite the chaos and the lights and the roaring crowd, a quiet smile appeared on his face. And when the music began again, louder and more explosive than before, everyone in that stadium understood something clearly. The concert had turned into a story unfolding in real time. And no one, not the fans, not the members, not even Jungkook or Jimin themselves, knew how that story would end. The music surged back to life, louder than before, but the stadium no longer felt like a place meant only for songs. Something fragile and volatile had been exposed under the lights, and every person in that arena could feel it vibrating beneath the performance. The members of BTS moved into the next choreography as the stage flooded with red lights and pulsing bass. Flames shot upward along the stage edges while thousands of voices screamed the lyrics. Yet the tension between Jungkook and Park Jimin lingered like static electricity in the air. They danced flawlessly. They sang perfectly. But every time they crossed paths during the choreography, something unspoken flashed between them. The crowd noticed every second of it. When the final chorus ended, the arena exploded into cheers again. The members gathered near the center stage platform, breathing hard under the blazing lights. Kim Namjoon stepped forward, trying to steady the emotional storm that had overtaken the concert. Okay, he said with a tired smile, we're reaching a level of chaos that even I didn't prepare for. The crowd laughed loudly. Min Yoongi tilted his microphone toward Jungkook. I blame him. Jungkook sighed. That's fair. Kim Taehyung leaned toward the audience dramatically. You know what the funniest part is, he said. Jimin immediately groaned. Taehyung, please. The funniest part, Taehyung continued, is that we still have several songs left. The stadium erupted in laughter and screams. Jimin rubbed his forehead. This night is never going to end. Jungkook watched him quietly. You're still angry. Jimin glanced at him. I'm not angry. You look angry. That's just my face. Yoongi chuckled quietly. Not convincing. Jimin pointed toward him. You're supposed to be neutral. I'm entertained, Yoongi replied calmly. Namjoon raised his hands slightly. All right, let's breathe for a second. But Jungkook stepped forward again before the moment could fade. Jimin. Jimin looked at him cautiously. What? You said something earlier. You've said that 3 times already. Because I'm still trying to understand it. Jimin crossed his arms. Which part? You said if you hadn't looked away, you might have looked too long. The crowd immediately reacted with a fresh wave of screams. Jimin closed his eyes briefly. You're repeating it again. Yes. Why? Because I want to know what you meant. Jimin opened his eyes again slowly. You already know. No, I don't. Yes, you do. Then say it. The tension tightened like a wire between them. Jimin took a deep breath. Fine. The stadium fell silent again. If I looked too long, Jimin said quietly, people might have noticed. Jungkook frowned. People noticed anyway. Not like this. Jungkook's voice softened. So you were protecting us. Jimin hesitated. Maybe. Or protecting yourself. Jimin didn't answer. The silence spoke loudly enough. Taehyung whispered toward Yoongi, this feels like a drama finale. Yoongi nodded. But we're still halfway through. Namjoon exhaled slowly. Guys, he said carefully, we should probably move forward with the show. But Jungkook wasn't done. You said feelings like this are dangerous, Jungkook continued. Yes. Dangerous because they're real. Jimin frowned. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Jimin gestured toward the massive stadium around them. This. The ocean of lights. The screaming fans. The cameras capturing every blink. We live under a microscope, Jimin said. Every word becomes a headline. Jungkook shrugged slightly. Maybe the headlines will survive. Jimin laughed softly. You're reckless. You're cautious. Someone has to be. Maybe. Jimin studied him carefully. But tell me something honestly. Jungkook nodded. Okay. What if this changes everything? Jungkook smiled faintly. Maybe it was supposed to. Jimin stared at him. You really believe that? Yes. Even if it makes things harder. Jungkook nodded without hesitation. Yes. Jimin ran a hand through his hair again. You've always been like this. Like what? Brave when it matters. Jungkook laughed quietly. I was terrified. You didn't look terrified. That's because I was more afraid of not saying it. The words landed gently but deeply. Jimin's expression softened for a moment. Then suddenly, another voice cut into the tension. A staff member appeared near the side of the stage, urgently signaling toward Namjoon. Namjoon walked over briefly listening. His expression changed slightly. When he returned, he looked at the group with a half-amused, half-stressed smile. "So," he said slowly, "small update." The members looked at him. "What?" Yoongi asked. Namjoon glanced toward the giant screens where social media comments were flashing during the live broadcast. "The entire world is currently talking about this." Taehyung grinned. "That sounds about right." Namjoon shook his head. "No, I mean literally." He pointed toward the screen. Trending tags were flying past faster than anyone could read. Jimin groaned softly. "Great." Jungkook laughed under his breath. "Well." Jimin turned toward him sharply. "Don't say well." "What?" "You look way too calm." Jungkook shrugged. "Because nothing changed." Jimin blinked. "Nothing changed." "Yes." "You confessed feelings on stage." "And." "You forced me into an emotional conversation in front of millions of people." "And." Jimin stared at him like he had lost his mind. Jungkook smiled softly. "You're still here." The sentence stopped Jimin mid-breath. "You didn't run away," Jungkook continued. Jimin's voice was quieter now. "Where would I go?" Jungkook met his eyes. "That's exactly my point." For a moment, the chaos of the stadium faded again. Jimin looked at him carefully. Then something unexpected happened. He laughed. Not awkwardly. Not nervously. A genuine laugh. "You're impossible," Jimin said. Jungkook nodded. "That's been established." Jimin shook his head, still smiling faintly. "But you know what?" "What?" "You're also right about one thing." Jungkook tilted his head. "What's that?" Jimin glanced at the audience again. "The lights. The noise. The history of everything they built together." Then he looked back at Jungkook. "I didn't run." The words settled quietly between them. Jungkook's smile softened. "No," he said gently. "You didn't." Namjoon clapped his hands once with a relieved laugh. "All right," he announced, raising his microphone. "Before we all collapse from emotional exhaustion." The crowd cheered. "Let's finish this concert properly." The music roared back to life. Fireworks burst again above the stadium. And as the members moved into the next performance, one truth had become impossible to ignore. Tonight wasn't just a concert anymore. It was the night honesty stepped into the spotlight and refused to leave. The music thundered back through the stadium once again, but something inside the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The crowd was louder now, more emotional, as if everyone understood they were witnessing a moment that would live far beyond the night itself. The stage lights shifted to deep blue as the next performance began, casting long shadows across the enormous platform where the members of BTS moved into formation. Jungkook took his position near the front of the stage. His heartbeat had not slowed since the moment he stopped the music earlier. Every movement felt sharper now, more alive, as if the adrenaline of telling the truth had unlocked something he could never close again. Across the stage, Park Jimin danced through the choreography with his usual grace. His movements were fluid, elegant, almost effortless. But Jungkook knew him too well. The small tension in his jaw. The brief hesitation before certain steps. The way his eyes occasionally searched the stage for Jungkook without realizing it. The performance built toward its explosive chorus, lights flashing rapidly while the crowd screamed the lyrics back at them. Yet the emotional center of the entire arena seemed to orbit around the silent gravity between those two figures. When the final beat slammed through the speakers, fireworks erupted above the stadium again. The members regrouped near the main stage, breathless from the intense choreography. The audience roared so loudly, the sound vibrated through the metal structures beneath their feet. Kim Namjoon lifted his microphone with a tired laugh. "I think," he said, "we might need a moment to breathe." The fans cheered wildly. Min Yoongi wiped sweat from his forehead and glanced toward Jungkook. "You realize," he said calmly, "this concert will probably be studied in media classes." Jungkook chuckled. "That sounds dramatic." Yoongi raised an eyebrow. "You stopped a stadium concert to confess feelings." "Not confess. Declare then." "Still not that." From the side, Kim Taehyung burst into laughter. "I love how you're still arguing about the wording." Jimin sighed loudly. "Can we please stop reliving that moment every 5 minutes?" Taehyung pointed at the crowd. "They won't let us." Indeed, the audience was chanting loudly now, voices merging into a wave that echoed through the night. "Talk, talk, talk." Jimin closed his eyes briefly. "This is a nightmare." Jungkook leaned slightly closer. "You're the one who said you looked away on purpose." Jimin gave him a sharp look. "And you're the one who forced that conversation into existence." Namjoon stepped between them slightly, smiling in that careful way he used when situations threatened to spiral. "All right," he said, "maybe we should change the topic." But Jimin suddenly spoke again. "No." The word stopped everyone. Jimin looked directly at Jungkook. "You keep asking why I looked away," he said quietly. "Yes. Do you really want the full answer?" Jungkook didn't hesitate. "Yes." The crowd sensed something serious was coming and fell into a strange hush. Jimin exhaled slowly. "The truth," he said, "is that I knew." Jungkook frowned slightly. "Knew what?" "That you felt something." The words landed softly but heavily. Jungkook blinked. "You knew?" "Yes." "For how long?" Jimin gave a small, sad smile. "Long enough that pretending became a habit." Jungkook ran a hand through his hair, processing that. "You should have said something." Jimin laughed quietly. "Look around us." He gestured toward the enormous stadium again. "You think it's that simple?" Jungkook shook his head. "No." "Exactly." Jimin's voice grew softer. "We built our lives inside something fragile." "Fragile," Jungkook repeated. "Yes." "All of this," Jungkook gestured toward the cheering crowd, "this isn't fragile." "The music isn't," Jimin said. "The connection is, but people are." Jungkook studied him carefully. "You're afraid." Jimin nodded once. "Yes." "Of what?" Jimin's answer came immediately. "Of losing what we already have." The sentence hung between them like a quiet confession of its own. Yoongi muttered softly to Namjoon, "That's the real problem." Namjoon nodded. Taehyung whispered, "I feel like we should leave the stage." But neither Jungkook nor Jimin noticed the others anymore. Jungkook stepped closer again. "You think honesty would destroy us?" "No." "Then what?" Jimin's eyes flickered with something raw. "I think honesty might change everything." Jungkook smiled faintly. "Maybe everything needs to change." Jimin stared at him. "You really believe that?" "Yes." Jimin laughed softly, shaking his head. "You're unbelievably stubborn. Only about things that matter. And this matters that much." Jungkook didn't hesitate. "Yes." The certainty in his voice made something tighten inside Jimin's chest. For years he had sensed those feelings beneath the surface, like a quiet current running beneath calm water. Now the current was a flood. You're dangerous tonight, Jimin murmured. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. How? You're not holding anything back. Neither are you. Jimin smiled faintly. That's because you forced me into it. Jungkook laughed. I didn't force you to say anything. You forced the truth into the room. The crowd erupted into cheers again. Namjoon looked toward the backstage entrance, where several staff members were now practically waving for them to continue the show. He sighed. We really should keep moving. But Jimin suddenly turned toward Jungkook again, his voice lowering slightly. One more question. Jungkook nodded. Ask. If I hadn't said anything tonight, Jimin asked, would you still have told the truth? Jungkook thought for only a second. Yes. When? Jungkook smiled softly. Eventually. Jimin shook his head. That's vague. I didn't know when the courage would come. Jimin looked at him for a long moment. Then his expression softened into something almost gentle. Well, Jimin said quietly, you definitely found it tonight. Jungkook chuckled. Yeah. The two of them stood there for a moment while the crowd roared around them, the lights shining down like distant stars. Finally, Namjoon clapped his hands once. All right, he said with a laugh. If we don't finish this concert soon, the staff might actually drag us off the stage. Yoongi nodded. That would be embarrassing. Taehyung grinned. But historic. Jimin sighed and lifted his microphone again. Let's finish this properly, he said. The band launched into the next song, louder and more explosive than before. But even as the music filled the stadium once more, one truth remained clear to everyone watching. Tonight had become more than a concert. It had become the moment when years of silence finally shattered under the weight of honesty. The next song ended with a final burst of fireworks that lit the entire stadium like a sunrise of sparks. The roar from the crowd rolled endlessly across the arena, louder than anything earlier that night. Yet beneath the celebration, something heavier lingered in the air, something unfinished. The members of BTS gathered near the extended stage where the runway reached deep into the sea of fans. The lights softened into warm gold, signaling the final segment of the concert. But everyone could feel it. The night still hadn't reached its real ending. Kim Namjoon stepped forward slowly, holding his microphone with both hands as he scanned the enormous stadium. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried both warmth and exhaustion. You know, he said with a soft smile, we've had many concerts over the years, but tonight feels different. The audience screamed in agreement. Namjoon laughed quietly. I'm not sure our managers would agree with that statement. The crowd erupted in laughter. Behind him, Min Yoongi leaned toward his microphone. They definitely don't. Kim Taehyung grinned widely. I think half the staff is having a panic attack backstage. Jimin groaned. Please stop reminding me. Jungkook chuckled softly beside him. Too late for that. Jimin shot him a sideways glance. You started this. Jungkook shrugged. I told the truth. That doesn't make the consequences disappear. Yoongi crossed his arms, watching them with quiet interest. You two are still arguing about that. Jimin pointed at Jungkook again. Because he still thinks this is simple. Jungkook frowned slightly. It is simple. Jimin stared at him in disbelief. Simple. Yes. You confessed feelings in front of millions of people. I expressed something honest. Jimin threw his hands into the air. That's the same thing. Taehyung laughed loudly. I love how we're debating the definition now. Namjoon rubbed his temples with a small smile. Okay, he said. Maybe we should calm down before the final stage. But Jungkook suddenly spoke again, his voice quieter this time. Jimin. Jimin looked at him cautiously. What? Are you still afraid? The question landed softly, yet the tension in it was unmistakable. Jimin hesitated. Of course I am. Why? Jimin gestured toward the massive arena around them again. This. The fans. No. The attention. No. Jimin took a breath. I'm afraid of what happens after tonight. Jungkook studied him carefully. You think everything will collapse. I think everything will change. Jungkook nodded slowly. Maybe it should. Jimin shook his head. You say that like change is easy. I never said it was easy. Then why do you look so calm? Jungkook laughed softly. Because I spent years being afraid already. The honesty in his voice silenced the moment. Jimin looked at him differently now. You were really carrying this for that long. Yes. And you never hated me for ignoring it. Jungkook shook his head. No. Why not? Because I understood why you did. Jimin blinked. You did. Yes. Jungkook glanced out toward the endless lights of the crowd. You were protecting everything we built. Jimin's expression softened. That's exactly what I was doing. I know. Jimin looked at him quietly for a long moment. And yet you still forced the truth out tonight. Jungkook smiled faintly. Because protecting something doesn't mean pretending forever. The words settled deeply between them. Taehyung whispered toward Yoongi, this feels like a movie. Yoongi nodded slowly. And we're all stuck in the middle scene. Namjoon cleared his throat gently. Before this becomes a full philosophical debate. The audience laughed again. Maybe we should talk about something else. But Jimin suddenly stepped closer to Jungkook again. His voice dropped slightly. One last thing. Jungkook nodded. Okay. Jimin looked straight into his eyes. You said earlier that you were afraid of losing me. Yes. What if I told you that fear goes both ways? Jungkook blinked. What do you mean? Jimin hesitated, then spoke quietly. Sometimes when I thought about those feelings, I didn't look away because I was scared of the world. Jungkook's heartbeat slowed. Then why? Jimin's voice was almost a whisper. Because I was scared of how much it might mean. The crowd reacted instantly, another wave of emotional cheers rising across the stadium. Jungkook stared at him, stunned. You're serious? Yes. 4 years. Yes. Jungkook laughed softly in disbelief. We're really idiots. Jimin nodded. Completely. Taehyung burst out laughing. I've been saying that for 10 minutes. Yoongi added calmly, longer than that. Namjoon shook his head with an amused sigh. You two just discovered something the rest of us suspected. Jimin turned toward him sharply. You suspected. Namjoon raised his hands defensively. I never said anything. Yoongi shrugged. It was obvious. Jungkook groaned. Great. Taehyung pointed dramatically at them. You two thought you were subtle. Jimin covered his face briefly. This is humiliating. Jungkook laughed. A little. The tension that had gripped the stage earlier began to soften into something warmer. But Jimin looked at Jungkook again, more serious now. You know what happens after tonight, right? Jungkook nodded. Yes. People will talk. I know. They'll speculate. I know. They'll question everything. Jungkook's expression remained calm. That's their job. And ours. Jungkook met his gaze. Ours is to keep standing here. Jimin studied him carefully. You really think we can handle that? Jungkook smiled softly. We've handled worse. Jimin exhaled slowly. Then, after a moment, he nodded. Yeah. Namjoon clapped his hands once, relieved. All right, he announced. Let's end this concert the way it deserves. The crowd screamed loudly. The band began playing the final song, a powerful anthem that echoed across the entire stadium. As the members moved into the last choreography of the night, the energy in the arena felt almost overwhelming. But when the final note rang out and the confetti began falling from above, something quiet happened at the center of the stage. Jimin stepped closer to Jungkook again. The audience was still cheering wildly. The lights shimmered. And in the middle of that storm of sound, Jimin spoke one last quiet sentence. You're still not allowed to stop the music again. Jungkook laughed softly. No promises. Jimin shook his head, smiling despite himself. But for the first time that night, the fear in his eyes had finally faded. Because whatever came next, they were no longer pretending. And somehow, standing under those lights, with the truth finally spoken, that felt stronger than silence ever had. The confetti kept falling long after the final note faded. Tiny silver pieces drifted through the stadium lights like slow snow, covering the stage in a shimmering layer that reflected the purple glow of thousands of light sticks. The cheering had not stopped. If anything, it had grown louder, more emotional, as if the entire audience understood they had just witnessed something that would be remembered for years. The members of BTS stood together near the center of the stage, breathing heavily after the last performance. Sweat glistened under the lights, their chests rising and falling as the roar of 80,000 fans rolled across the stadium. Kim Namjoon stepped forward slowly, his eyes scanning the ocean of people in front of him. He smiled. Not the polished smile used for cameras. A real one. Well, he said softly into the microphone, I think it's safe to say tonight was unforgettable. The crowd screamed so loudly, the stage vibrated beneath their feet. Behind him, Min Yoongi shook his head with a quiet laugh. That's one way to describe it. Kim Taehyung leaned toward the audience dramatically. I'm pretty sure half the internet is crying right now. Jimin groaned beside him. Please don't remind me. The fans laughed through their tears. Jungkook stood a little behind them, looking out over the endless sea of lights. For a moment, he simply watched the crowd in silence. Then his eyes drifted to the person standing beside him. Park Jimin. Jimin noticed the look immediately. He sighed. You're staring again. Jungkook smiled faintly. Maybe. You're impossible. That's been confirmed tonight. Jimin shook his head, but a small smile appeared anyway. The tension that had filled the stage earlier had softened into something quieter now, something deeper than the chaos of emotions that had erupted when the music first stopped. Namjoon glanced at them both knowingly before speaking again to the audience. You know, he said, music connects people in ways we don't always expect. The stadium fell quieter, listening. Tonight wasn't just about songs, he continued. It was about honesty. A wave of cheers rolled through the crowd. Yoongi stepped forward slightly. And maybe, he added calmly, about saying things before it's too late. The fans cried louder. Jimin glanced sideways at Jungkook again. You're getting philosophical now, he muttered. Jungkook laughed softly. I started it. Yes, Jimin said, you definitely did. Taehyung suddenly stepped between them with exaggerated drama. before you two start another emotional debate." The crowd laughed. "We should probably say goodbye." A chorus of disappointed groans rose from the audience. Namjoon lifted his microphone again. "Army," he said warmly, "thank you for staying with us tonight." The stadium erupted in cheers. "We always say this," Namjoon continued, "but it's true every time. None of this exists without you." The fans shouted their love back in a thunderous wave. Confetti continued drifting down slowly as the members lined up together at the front of the stage. Jungkook looked out at the audience again. Then he lifted his microphone. His voice came out softer than before. "Earlier tonight, I stopped the music." The crowd cheered instantly. Jimin covered his face with one hand. Jungkook chuckled. "I didn't know what would happen after that moment," he admitted. He paused. "But I'm glad it happened." The audience responded with emotional screams. Jimin glanced at him again. "You really mean that?" "Yes, even with all the chaos." Jungkook nodded. "Especially because of it." Jimin considered that for a moment. Then he sighed quietly. "You know what the strange part is?" "What?" Jimin looked out at the fans. "For years, I thought silence was safer." Jungkook listened carefully. "But tonight," Jimin continued, "I realized something." Jungkook tilted his head. "What?" Jimin's voice softened. "Sometimes silence is the thing that scares you the most." The stadium reacted with another wave of emotional cheers. Jungkook smiled. "Yeah." Jimin turned toward him fully now. "And for the record," he added quietly, "you're still reckless." Jungkook laughed. "And you're still cautious." Jimin nodded. "That's probably why this works." Jungkook blinked. "Did you just say it works?" Jimin smirked faintly. "Don't get used to it." The members around them laughed. Namjoon shook his head with a fond smile. "You two really saved the most dramatic conversation for the stage." Yoongi added dryly, "At least it made the concert memorable." Taehyung threw his arms around both Jungkook and Jimin suddenly. "This is the best concert ever." Jimin protested immediately. Taehyung, stop. But the group hug had already formed, the seven of them leaning together as the crowd screamed with joy. For a moment they stayed like that, laughing under the falling confetti and flashing lights. Years of memories. Years of struggles. Years of standing on stages just like this. Finally, they stepped forward together and bowed deeply to the audience. The roar of the crowd was deafening. When they stood again, Jungkook looked at Jimin one last time. Jimin caught the glance. "What?" Jungkook smiled. "Nothing." Jimin raised an eyebrow. "That's suspicious." Jungkook shrugged. "Just remembering something." "What?" Jungkook leaned slightly closer. "That you didn't run." Jimin stared at him for a moment. Then he smiled softly. "No," he said. "I didn't." The lights slowly dimmed across the stadium as the final goodbye began. The crowd kept cheering, voices echoing into the night. And somewhere in that sea of lightsticks and falling confetti, the moment that began with one stopped song had quietly transformed into something much bigger. Not just a confession, not just a concert, but the night when silence finally gave way to truth, and the music that followed felt more real than ever before.